evening. Thank you for joining us for this virtual scoping meeting, a real sign of the times. This evening, we're going to go over some information related to the general plan and downtown specific plan update, which some of you know has been kind of in preparation for a few years now. And now we've added the preparation of the 2021 to 2029 housing element. So altogether, those three documents make up our project. And tonight, we're going to go over the CEQA process, both in general to just give you an overview and also how the CEQA process will go for this project. Members of the city staff will go over the project itself. Then we'll talk about some next steps, including making sure we're clear on where you can contribute public input. And then we will have a Q&A session at the end. We do want you to know too that because we are recording this presentation at the end so that it will be posted online. So if you have friends that couldn't make it tonight or anyone else you just want to see it again, it'll be there in the future for others to review. So with that, let me go to introductions. City staff, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Joanna Hankimmer, and I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development. And we have Margaret Lynn and Elizabeth Burrell. Maybe you can both introduce yourselves real quick. Margaret?
Hi, Margaret Lynn, Manager of Long Range Planning and Economic Development.
Hi, and I'm Liz Burrell, and I'm a Long Range Planning Principal in an interim position here at the city.
Right, and we don't have folks from PlaceWorks presenting tonight. They do have an integral role in the project, and so sort of wanted to virtually introduce them as well. Amy and Woody and Jonathan are all leads on various parts of the general plan and specific plan update, as well as the housing element. My name is Jillian Neary. I'm from SOMAS, and I'm an environmental consultant working on behalf of the city. I'm the project manager for the CEQA process. And finally, we have, but not least, from Iteris. Sean, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, Sean Dale. I'm a senior planner with Iteris. We're the transportation consultant.
Great. So with that, let me jump into California Environmental Quality Act, or as it's called for short, CEQA. So what we're doing tonight is a scoping meeting, which is part of what's called the scoping process. And the first step in that scoping process is releasing what's called a notice of preparation of a draft EIR, or an NOP. So many of you may have gotten that NOP or seen it online or heard it from a friend and looked it up. And the purpose and our scoping meeting, is you can see from April 23rd, it's actually about 32 days, and it'll go through May 24th. And just to be clear, there are a couple of different times that you can contribute to or comment on the EIR before it goes to hearings. This is not the public review for the what's called Program EIR that we're preparing, or PEIR, which is what a lot of people think of when they comment on a CEQA document. So this, just to be clear, isn't a public review, although that's anticipated not too far along in the summer. The purpose of the scoping meeting and the scoping process is really threefold. We want to facilitate consultation with interested parties, and that's agencies, individuals, the public, groups, business organizations like the Chamber of Commerce, things like that. And the purpose is to solicit feedback on the scope of that EIR, hence the name scoping process. And again, that is to help inform that while it's prepared before going out for public review, we hope this summer. And the scoping comments, because it's on a CEQA document, which is really solely concerned with the environment, it should focus on identifying environmental topics for study rather than the merits of the project. there are other avenues to contribute feedback on that, but for purposes of scoping, we want to understand the environmental concerns that any interested parties will have and that we should address in that document. So taking a further step back, overall for CEQA, of which the scoping process is a part of, CEQA has 4 main purposes, sort of boiled down, and it is to inform both decision makers, in this case that'll be the Planning Commission and City Council, as well as the public, about potential environmental effects that are significant. And if those significant effects are identified during preparation of the CEQA document, whatever kind it is, to then try to identify ways, feasible ways to avoid, ideally, or significantly reduce those impacts. And what you want to do is try to prevent what's called a significant unavoidable impact. And what that is through mitigation and or alternatives. And a significant unavoidable impact is when you've applied any alternatives, tweaks to the project, mitigation, and I may have reduced that impact, but it still exceeds the threshold that's applicable in that particular instance. And if that should occur, part of a CEQA process is to disclose to the public the reasons why that occurred. So there in this, where we have an environmental consultant or SOMIS, and then there's a lead agency. And those are 2 separate parties in the CEQA process that have some distinct roles and responsibilities, but these 2 roles work very close together during the CEQA process. The lead agency is the City of South Pasadena. And under CEQA, they are responsible and required to independently review and analyze all reports, all documentation. And that is to make sure that when the EIR is circulated for public review, it reflects what's called their independent judgment. And the Planning Commission and the City Council, as I mentioned, are the decision makers for this project. They will both consider the EIR, and that includes any comments that have been provided on that EIR by the public. And they have the ability and the responsibility to either approve, they can modify, or they can deny the project. SOMIS, as the environmental consultant, we're hired as a consultant to provide objective expert analysis. And that objective part is critically important. We provide an unbiased, fact-based role to work on behalf of and closely with the city to prepare the document, but we don't advocate for any position or decision with regard to how to approach an analysis or what its findings should be. It's truly a cooperative effort. So CEQA dictates that all EIRs include certain things. These are all of those things actually. Includes a table of contents and executive summary, an environmental setting, and this is the baseline used for impact analysis, a description of the project, and also project objectives, what the lead agency, the city, what is their objective for this project to get out of it, not just environmentally, but as a project at all, how it will affect the city. And then of course, the environmental impact analysis. And this is to be based on what's called substantial evidence. And we will address direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts. For each impact or basically analysis, we'll make a finding, a determination of impact significance. And if necessary, if we find a significant impact, identify feasible mitigation measures that can reduce or again, ideally avoid those significant impacts. And finally, we will develop alternatives that are comparatively analyzed to the project. And the alternatives are developed with a focus on reducing any significant direct, indirect, or cumulative impacts that we find for the project as proposed. So because there wasn't an initial study prepared, since the city knows right out of the gate that an EIR would be necessary, CEQA allows that the lead agency can just get a move on preparing that EIR. So that means that all of the topics that are currently in what's called Appendix G, the state CEQA guidelines, will be addressed in the EIR. None of these topics were scoped out. As you can see, there are 21, or maybe if you counted 21 topics, plus some other mandated topics, including growth-inducing impacts and discussing irreversible changes because of the project. Some of these topics you can see are in bold italics. And those are the topics that, based on the information we have right now, we, meaning the city and SOMAS, we anticipate that these are either topics that are of most public concern or may have the most potentially significant effects. Oh, one more thing. Before I move on from that, I want to mention we want to have a little focus on the topic of transportation, because the methodology to assess transportation in CEQA documents has gone through a substantial change in approach. And I'm going to turn it over to Sean, our transportation consultant, to go over that. And I also want to mention, some of you may have seen there is a longer form presentation that will also stay up on the website regarding this change. And so this is a more brief overview. So with that,
Great. Thank you, Jillian. As you say, transportation analysis under CEQA recently did change. The California legislature passed a law that CEQA guidelines for transportation can no longer view vehicle congestion and delay as an environmental impact. And it directed the governor's Office of Planning and Research to find a more appropriate metric for environmental assessment. This shift in CEQA transportation analysis is intended to promote outcomes that reduce reliance on automobile travel so that it aligns more with state goals for reducing emissions, investing in multimodal transportation networks, and encouraging higher density infill development. The new metric for CEQA transportation analysis developed by the governor's Office of Planning and Research is based on the vehicle miles traveled of a proposed project. That's per person, which is the distance of vehicle travel associated with a project divided by the people on site. And that went into effect July 2020. The previous CEQA transportation assessment focused on intersection and roadway operational analysis, and it's commonly referred to as level of service analysis because the outputs were assigned a letter grade for quality A through F. And it still is a common type of analysis used for the design and management of roadway systems. But when used for environmental analysis, it means that issues were only identified, assessed, and assigned mitigation by looking at how a project affects vehicle travel. So that led to years of support for projects and mitigations that were increasingly counter to state and local policies supporting walking, biking, transit use, and a built environment that generally supports a variety of activities. The new metric for vehicle miles traveled is closer to supporting statewide goals for greenhouse gas emission reductions as well. So the assessment of vehicle operating conditions continues to be a major component of how transportation systems are planned and operated. They're just no longer part of the CEQA process. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. This introduces the concept of vehicle miles traveled and some examples. So vehicle miles traveled are made up of each vehicle trip and its distance over the course of the day. The primary determinants of vehicle trips are household demographics, their size and composition, and their economic circumstances, particularly employment status and income level. The geographic distribution of households, employment, schools, shopping, recreational destinations all influence the distance of travel. In general, VMT is lower in areas where there are a diversity of land uses in close proximity, which tends to shorten trips, and where there are multimodal transportation networks that reduce the need for automobile travel. Since assessing total vehicle miles traveled would disadvantage large projects and generally discourage economic growth, an efficiency metric or index of VMT by population, employment, or both was developed. So in the first example is one person from a project traveling in one car 10 miles per day. That's 10 total vehicle miles traveled. In the next one, you have 3 people each traveling 10 miles per day for a total of 30 total miles. But that is just still 10 vehicle miles traveled per capita per the population. And then the third example, you see how VMT is an overall transportation metric, and it really accounts for the other types of travel by simply not including their mileage in the calculation. So it would be 3 people each traveling 10 miles, but only one person is using a car. The other 2 are using bike and transit. And so it's only 10 total vehicle miles traveled divided by the 3 people. So it's 3.33 vehicle miles traveled per capita. Because cars can generally travel longer distances and pretty much go anywhere served by a roadway, in order to lower vehicle miles traveled per capita, land use needs to be developed closer to transit, walking, and biking options. And then the transportation infrastructure supporting those types of transportation also needs to be supported. Next slide. So this shows the 2 types of analysis, the VMT and the operational approach. And the operational approach, frankly, was never intended for environmental analysis. It was just sort of a convenient analysis that was already being done by cities anyway for other reasons, and then they applied that towards CEQA. So this chart compares in practical terms the difference between the 2 transportation methods. So the impact previously being evaluated was the adequacy of roadway operations. And now it's more tied to greenhouse gas emissions because it's the amount of vehicle travel in general. The activity previously being measured was congestion, and now it's the total daily length of trips by the number of people or employees. And then the travel time period analyzed previously was peak hours, sort of showing most congested conditions. And VMT looks at travel throughout the course of a day. Level of service has a lot to do with the quality of vehicle infrastructure, while vehicle miles traveled is mostly influenced by land use patterns. And finally, mitigation for traffic analysis is for vehicles, while for VMT, it's for all people making all trips, including walking, biking, and transit. And these are 2 different and useful ways of understanding the transportation system, but as we move forward, both are going to be used to give us a better understanding of how transportation supports the travel needs and affects the city and its neighborhoods. Next slide. So where did the level of service analysis go? The state law does not prohibit using that operations-based analysis for non-CEQA purposes. So most cities, including the city of South Pasadena, are retaining that for traffic studies. And that's to ensure adequate public infrastructure consistent with general plan policy. The Public Works Department will continue to require that analysis for concurrence for new major projects to make sure local transportation improvements are made. A longer version of this presentation is posted on the Program EIR webpage, and it's next to the link to this meeting. And I will turn it back to Jillian.
Thank you, Sean. So now we've gone over all the CEQA topics and the overall CEQA, overview of CEQA. What I'd like to delve into is the CEQA process that will happen for this program EIR. As we've talked about, the notice of preparation and the scoping process is happening now, spring 2021. We are at the same time in the process of preparing, it's called the draft program environmental impact report. And this must satisfy the CEQA requirements that I've gone over and also reflect the lead agency's judgment. They will be reviewing everything, we'll be working together on the issues and making sure we put out a great document. It will, of course, consideration of input from the scoping process. And as I mentioned, the conclusions must be based on substantial evidence. It's called in light of the whole record. And that substantial evidence is defined in CEQA as either being fact, reasonable assumption, predicated on fact, or an expert opinion supported by fact. So that the conclusions that you'll see in the EIR will be based on this concept and defined metric of substantial evidence under CEQA. The public review of the EIR, and the city is planning a 60-day public review, a little longer than 45 days, but of course it's such an important document for the community. And of course it's, you know, three sort of companion documents to go over as well. When those are prepared and all up online, that review is anticipated this summer. After the public review of the program EIR, we will consider taking all the comments that were received and prepare its final program EIR. And that will include several items, one of which is the draft EIR. And if there are any clarifications for corrections or additions, those will be included. Provide written responses to all comments received on the EIR from agencies and other interested parties. It will be what's called a findings of fact and also a statement of overriding considerations. The findings document, as this is sort of referred to in shorthand, will include a description of basically every finding, every conclusion for every threshold presented in the EIR, summarized in a way that is specified by CEQA. And again, if there are any impacts that are eventually found significant, unavoidable after mitigation or alternatives, the findings must include the statement of overriding considerations or is a brief explanation of the rationale for that impact. And that rationale is typically something that's non-environmental because of economic reasons or state legislature is requiring adoption, such as the housing element or other things, but it must provide a clear and cogent rationale for that finding as part of the overall decision-making process for the city, of which the environmental process is just one facet. There will also be a mitigation, monitoring, and reporting program, or MMRP, that will include all the mitigation measures from the EIR and information on how and when to implement those, who are the responsible parties, and a way to track that all of the mitigation gets appropriately implemented down the line after the EIR. The final step in the CEQA process will be public hearings. There will be a series of hearings during this coming winter, 2021. There will be a hearing before both Planning Commission and City Council for the EIR certification, and on that same agenda will be the housing element adoption due to requirements of state law. Those two things are together, and then that will be followed by hearings for the general plan and the downtown specific plan update adoption. And there are a few different points along this process for CEQA input, some that I've mentioned, but we just really want to reiterate. The first of those is the scoping period, which goes through May 24th. And the next is the 60-day program EIR review period, which we're anticipating this summer. And finally, at the public hearings, both at Planning Commission and City Council, comments will be, and commentary as well during the meetings, as well as those prior, can be recorded on the city's line. They can be written in, just as with any other hearing. And those hearings are expected this winter. So to submit written comments and for the scoping period and the public review during the summer, we do require, and CEQA requires, written comments. If you have comments on this through the Q&A session at the end, please put it in the chat function, and those are going to be considered written comments. We're going to copy and paste all of those before we're done with our program. We'll go over more what the Q&A process, how that will happen. to submit comments during the scoping process, and this will be the same for the EIR. If you're going via mail, attention Margaret Lynn, who's on this call at 1414 Mission Street, City Hall, via email, which is general plan altogether at southpasadenaca.gov. If you have comments, scoping comments, please submit them by 4 p.m. to close of business at City Hall on Monday, May 24th. Currently, there are public review drafts of the project documents, in this case, the general plan, downtown and downtown specific plan update, and the housing plan update, when it is fully pulled together, are going to be online at these links. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret and city staff to go over the project documents.
Thank you so much, Jillian. So just as a recap, the project is the general plan and downtown specific plan update, as well as the 2021-2029 housing element. Next slide, please. So for those who aren't familiar, a general plan basically outlines the community's vision for the future of the city and is a regulatory document that includes goals, policies, and actions to achieve that vision. Specific plans provide more refined policies for a designated area and is a tool for implementing the overall vision set in the general plan. So for South Pasadena, the general plan was last updated in 1988, and the Mission Street specific plan was adopted in 1996. Next slide, please. So the general plan and downtown specific plan update would provide a vision for future development through 2040. And during the public engagement process, two primary goals were developed: conservation of resources and character, and preserving stable and established neighborhoods. Both documents will be organized in chapters that will include core themes that were also developed during the public engagement process. And these include things like our natural community or our accessible community. The vision will now incorporate the regional housing need assessment allocation that was provided by the Southern California Association of Governments to plan for 2,067 residential units. In addition, the draft plans will analyze the feasibility of accommodating a maximum of 130,000 square feet of retail and 300,000 square feet of office building in specific corridors, districts, and neighborhood centers. And now I'll hand it over to Liz to talk about the housing element.
Great, thank you. So the recirculation of the PEIR was necessitated because the scope of the project had been expanded to include the housing element, as Margaret was just saying. The housing element is a component of the general plan. It's one of 7 mandatory elements required under state law. It is more prescribed than other elements, and it must be presented to HCD, to the State Department of Housing and Community Development, for certification in a specific format using required data that identifies housing needs and including tangible programs or actions to address them. Needs are largely defined by the state's Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, and it is allocated to the city. The state will review South Pasadena's housing element to determine that this RHNA is accommodated by the properties included on the suitable sites inventory. This inventory will comprise vacant residential properties as well as properties to be redesignated for mixed use. Larger properties that can be rezoned with potential for more housing will play an important part in developing an acceptable sites inventory. The general plan elements must be consistent with each other. The main reason that progress on the general plan and the DTSP project was paused after the 2019 general plan draft was released for review was to coordinate with the planning to ensure internal consistency, as it became clear that the state RHNA allocation to the Southern California region was going to be significant. Could I have the next slide, please? The last housing element was analyzed under CEQA through an initial study and a negative declaration. The city's existing zoning at that time was sufficient to show capacity for 63 more units and be certified by the state based on the RHNA for that housing element. However, the significant RHNA number in the upcoming cycle cannot be satisfied with the city's existing land use designations and zoning, requiring changes that may have impacts and must be analyzed through the EIR process. Since these same changes are included in the general plan and DTSP updates, it's appropriate to fold the CEQA analysis of the housing element into the same PEIR and examine all the impacts or effects together. And with that, I will turn it back to Margaret to go over the timeline of this project.
Thank you, Liz. So the general plan and downtown specific plan was originally kicked off in 2016 with a robust public engagement period from 2017 to 2018. Unfortunately, in 2019, there was a number of changes. The consultant resigned and Placeworks was hired to complete the documents. Subsequently, a draft with minor modifications was re-released for public review. At the same time, SCAG released the draft RENA allocations with a significant increase in the amount of housing units that the city would need to plan for. So in 2020, the city hired Placeworks to prepare the 2021-2029 housing element to meet the RENA requirements and combine the housing element environmental analysis with the one that was being prepared for the general plan and downtown specific plan. Next slide, thank you. Due to the changes in the scope for the environmental document, the notice of preparation was recirculated and we're hosting a new scoping meeting today. Over the next few months, we will be releasing the draft PEIR and the housing element. In addition, staff will be releasing a revised draft of the general plan downtown specific plan that incorporates the public comments that were previously provided and the new housing element policies and programs. This will include additional public review and comment periods for each document. And then certification of the PEIR followed by the adoption of the planning documents. And that concludes the presentation, and we can now move on to the question and answer portion of the meeting. So all comments and questions on the environmental issues will be considered in the PEIR. If you have a comment or question, please submit your comment in the question and answer chat box below. And time permitting, we will call on you to unmute yourself and repeat the question aloud. Please note that only written comments or questions will be included in the record. Thank you. And so would like to note that we did receive 2 questions in the chat so far. And let's see. Josh, I'm going to ask you if you'd like to speak your questions out loud or repeat them.
Sure, I'd love to. I'll combine them together.
Okay.
So this is a scoping meeting for the housing element and general plan. The housing element has not been released to the public. I'm curious, how exactly are people supposed to comment on the housing element that has not been released to the public? And is there laws under CEQA that the documents have to be released before the scoping comment commences?
Okay, Jillian, would you mind answering that question?
Sure. And I am trying desperately to get my video going again, but in the meantime, I'll just answer. I would clarify that this scoping meeting is not on the planning documents. It's on what we're preparing as the CEQA document, which will be yet a separate document under separate cover on those documents. And so there are requirements in CEQA about what kind of information goes out for an EIR, which is the only document for which a notice of preparation is prepared. There are requirements for what is included in that, and we've met those requirements. And that is essentially that there is a brief description of whatever project, in this case, their planning documents, and that was described. I would hope we could all agree that the most germane fact about the housing element is simply the number of housing units that are going to be built. And, you know, as described in the recirculated NOP, these planning documents encompass the entire city. And there's no way to know for sure exactly where housing, or for that matter, the proposed commercial or retail will be built, and what combination or in what form. This is just a plan for those. And no, there isn't a requirement in CEQA to include the documents that, in this case, planning documents, to go out with that. Just enough information to provide some input on the environmental scope of the analysis. You could think of it too, if this were like a development project, right? There wouldn't be like a plan set and the application that the developer submitted included with the document. That doesn't go out with even a neg deck or an EIR for that matter. So I hope does that help answer your question? Is there anything else to clarify?
Am I unmuted still?
No, you're fine.
Yeah, no, I hear your answer, but I followed other cities, and when Santa Monica did their scoping meeting, they did two different plans of, hey, downtown versus not downtown. And when I want to say Pleasanton, I forget, it was a Northern California city that's been sued, might be Atherton. When they did it, they actually got specific guidelines of, hey, we're thinking of 115 dwelling units per acre downtown. And their reasons were, hey, you need this information for the CEQA document. So I'm kind of surprised to hear you say that the planning of where the housing goes, you feel is not important enough for the CEQA document. So I'm just.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should clarify. It isn't something that this is what you're referring to is just the notice of preparation, which is the only CEQA document, the recirculated notice, I should say, which is the only CEQA document that's been released that's germane to the housing element. For the CEQA document itself, so I said, this is not the public review for the CEQA document, right? So this is just to we're asking for public input. You know, there are people in the public and agencies that can have information that the city doesn't have, that SOMAS doesn't have as a consultant, that we have from our sources, what have you, that could help add additional facets to that analysis. So it is important, and there's that thing called a suitable sites inventory. And so there are some topics for where those suitable sites, you know, where it's anticipated these sites are the ones that could meet that RHNA, the RHNA allocation. But again, this is just, what you're speaking on is just the NOP, which is just meant to be a very brief description overview. The EIR itself, when it's released for public review, will have a very robust project description.
Okay, and I appreciate you talking about substantial evidence so in depth. My question's done. Thank you.
Oh, great.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. And I just want to say, I think that those are the only questions that we had, and I see that we have 2 or maybe 3 other attendees. If we don't get another question from them, I can do a quick closing. But what I do want to reiterate is kind of goes to Josh's question, and I think the confusion. Which is, you know, yes, we will have a draft for public review prior to a public comment period for the housing element, for the environmental part of the housing element. But this is not that review. This is merely a kind of an outline of what the environmental scope will, in a sense, cover, and an invitation for other agencies to give us any information that they might feel is relevant. So it is a bit confusing, but Josh, I want to let you know that we will have a draft. I anticipate a draft being available in, I think, June. And so we look forward to your review and others in the public. So thank you. And I think with that, I don't see anyone else added anything in the Q&A. I just want to say thank you to SOMAS and ITERIS, and thank you to our participants. I know that we only have a few today, but we're going to have this posted online, so anyone that wants to watch it can do so, and be able to submit comments. And maybe if someone could put the comment page back up again about how to submit a comment, that will be available on the website as well. but let's go to that really quick. There we go. So this is for the scoping document only. This is comments for that. So you can send them by mail to Margaret or by email. And only comments that are received in writing are addressed. Actually, we do have one more comment, looks like. It's a long one. So I think, let's see, give us a minute here. Jillian, are you able to see this?
Do we want to have her read, or do we just want to, I
think we would like the person who put the question in the chat to ask her question live. So should we let her speak? Should we do that?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Lauren, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute. You should be able to do so on the bottom left corner of your screen if you'd like to repeat the question that you posed in the chat.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I just submitted a written comment. I wasn't sure what the format was here, so I had something just prepared that's sort of a generic comment in support of housing. I have a master's degree in environmental planning and design, and I just find it continually flabbergasting the state of affairs in Los Angeles. And to tell you guys the truth, you seem to have done a really good job. But in my experience working in transportation planning and housing advocacy, like, it's very hard to follow when you use the acronyms for things because I don't know what they are, and then I'm distracted by, I'm not paying attention to what else you're saying because I'm trying to figure out what these acronyms stand for. So that's just a little commentary, but I had just written something about, well, I guess I'll just start. In September of 1945, President Truman addressed Congress to urge them to tackle the housing crisis by saying, quote, "A decent standard of housing for all is one of the irreducible obligations of modern civilization. The housing challenge is now squarely before us. We must begin to meet this challenge at once." I'd like to make note that was 75 years ago. I encourage you and I implore you to find the political will to aggressively accomplish what we've been striving for generations. I find the reluctance to support social equity through the creation of housing to be truly heartbreaking. I understand that change is difficult, but we need a plan for the future. I don't know about other places in our country, but in Los Angeles, I believe that we are an inclusive community with shared values, and our planning policy needs to reflect that.
Well, I mean, I'll jump in since I'm already on video, say that, I mean, at least in part is primarily a planning question. And since you're in environmental planning as well, about the regional housing needs analysis or assessment, I'm sorry, and how that gets distributed to all the cities and counties to try and distribute that equitable amount of housing, at all the different income levels. And of course, I will say that in terms of the city CEQA process, one of the reasons that it was decided to pause the EIR preparation, environmental impact preparation, that was already started for the general plan update and the downtown specific plan update, and to roll the current cycle housing element into one umbrella document, is it will help, it helps capture, all the impacts of all of that going on. It's sort of that worst case scenario, a very conservative approach to the process to capture those environmental impacts. But it also can provide a way to streamline and not skip. I want to be very clear that this isn't to skip the CEQA process in the future, but to help streamline the environmental review for future projects that are consistent with these planning documents that are then tiered off of this environmental impact report prepared for the planning documents. And, the environmental process can be a time-consuming, and contentious part of that. And to the extent that that part of it, you know, there'll still be CEQA, but if it can be streamlined, that helps support that development of housing that is so needed. So that's kind of the CEQA side of it that I can respond to that. Of the city, I can take my video off if the city wants to. Oops. Now that I finally figured that out. Oh.
Yep. Hi.
Oh, there you are. For a second, I was like, oh, did I squash somebody?
No, I'm here. And I think the point of the comment and the question is, you know, are we facing the housing crisis, you know, straight on? And that is the aim of the city, and we have direction from the state and the regional authority, which is the Southern California Council of Governments, or SCAG. So I apologize for using these acronyms. That is one of them.
Used to just slinging them around.
Yeah. With, you know, the number of housing units and at what income level we need to accommodate in the next 8 years in the city of South Pasadena. We're taking that challenge very seriously. We understand it. The state has created that mandate. It is our job to figure out how to accommodate that, and it is a very complex and difficult task to do, not just for our jurisdictions, but for others. But we are taking it very seriously, and we've been at this housing element for over a year, really trying to figure out strategies. And if you follow some of our discussions at Planning Commission and our public workshops over the last year, you'll see, you know, what we've been grappling with. But if you want to see what we're proposing, you know, very soon, within the next, I'd say month and a half, we'll have a draft of our housing element, and you can see how we are proposing to address the housing crisis and to, you know, doing our part in the city. I hope that answers your question. And I do appreciate your comment about the acronyms, because we do need to be a little bit more careful and not get too wonky. So thank you.
No, thank you both. And it's not just you. I guess it roots from being an intern in a planning department, being like, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, NOP is notice of preparation, and an RNOP is a recirculated notice of preparation. And the reason why we're recirculating it is because we circulated a notice of preparation for the general plan and the downtown specific plan about 3 years ago. And between then and now is when we got our requirement as a jurisdiction to plan for over 2,000 new housing units, which is very different than the way that the general plan and downtown specific plan were sort of shaping the vision for the city. So we've paused those documents in order to meaningfully address the housing, the RENA numbers, the regional, the regional housing needs assessment, RENA, allocation that the city has. And so this is recirculated because we're now revising those documents. And so this is a way of notifying people that we are doing that.
Well, thank you for your effort. It's very interesting to follow.
Thank you for following us. Continue to, please. Okay, I think with that, we don't have any other questions and answers. We'll end on that note. And if anyone, please encourage you not only to submit your comment if you have a comment on the notice of preparation, but please be on the lookout for our draft documents very soon, and the public comment period for the environmental documents. So thank you, participants, and thank you, panel.